Welcome to Friends Select School. My name is Bob Cotter. I'm the Director of Institutional Advancement at the school, and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of Rose Hagen, the head of the school, and the entire community. 2 years ago, we began a relationship with Joseph Fox Bookstore, which has resulted in a series of events such as tonight's. Michael Fox is an alumnus of Friends Select, and we are delighted to help support he and his mother Madeline as they run the premier independent bookstore in the area. If you're not on our mailing list for such events, please feel free to sign up out in the lobby, and we'll make sure that we let you know about future events when they happen. Tonight you're going to hear from James Hirsch, followed by Rubin Carter, and then they will answer questions for a brief period. As many as possible, but they want to leave enough time to be able to sign all of the books that people want to sign. At the end of the question and answer period, both James and Rubin will be in the room across the hall from the theater, and we'll set up a line so that you can purchase books from Joseph Fox Books and then have them signed. Due to time constraints, they will only be able to sign books and not any other kinds of memorabilia, and we appreciate your cooperation with that. If you do not wish to have a book signed, at the end of the talk, you can leave through the door, which is at the back right of the auditorium, and that will take you out to 17th Street. When Michael Fox called me to tell me the possibility of this event, I said yes immediately. We knew nothing about a movie at the time, let alone that Denzel would be in it. Growing up in the 60s and 70s, and I wish I could say as a very young person in the 60s and 70s, but I can't, I was both moved and angered by Rubin Carter's story. I felt then, and I still do, that it was a story about America that people needed to hear, and I couldn't understand why more people didn't know about it. Fortunately for us, James Hirsch has told that very complicated story in a powerful book that I strongly urge you to read. James S. Hirsch is a former reporter for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and Hurricane is his first book. Please welcome James Hirsch.
Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's good to be here. About a year and a half ago, Rubin and I traveled to New York to talk to publishers about our story proposal. And at the time, Rubin and I had spent many hours on the telephone. He lives in Toronto and I live in Boston, but we hadn't yet met face to face. So I booked us in a rather modest hotel in 2 small rooms, and I went to meet him for the first time. And Rubin opened up the door and he gives me this great big bear hug. But then he steps back and he gestures around his rather undersized room. He gives me that hard stare, and he shakes his head and says, "Jim, what is this? My prison cell was bigger than this room." I was summarily fired as his travel agent, but I did get to write the book. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes about the book and then give way to Rubin. So why a book about Rubin Carter? Before I began this project, I was like many people in this country, in that I was familiar with the outlines of Rubin's life. He'd been a top-rated boxer in the 1960s when he was arrested for triple homicide in New Jersey. Despite his claims of innocence, he was convicted of that crime. Over the years, he became a cause celeb as Bob Dylan, Muhammad Ali, and many others rallied to his support. Nonetheless, Rubin spent almost 20 years in prison before his conviction was overturned, and he was eventually fully exonerated. That's what I knew of Rubin's story when my agent called me in June of 1998 and told me that Rubin might be willing to work with an author in a story about his life. So I went out and I began reading everything that had been written about Rubin and started talking to some of his friends and lawyers. Then I called Rubin myself. Now, he didn't know me from Adam. So I just introduced myself and I said, "Rubin, I don't think your story has been told yet, and I'd like to tell it." Well, Rubin did not exactly jump at this offer. He doesn't trust people very readily. But we began talking, and finally I said, if I do this project, I have just one demand. I need to be able to walk through every door in your life and write what I find. And Rubin said, I have nothing to hide. So we got the ball rolling. What drew me to this story? Rubin's life has taken him through a series of inherently dramatic venues: the army, the boxing ring, the courtroom, the prison. And the action from these venues propels the narrative along. There are also a lot of surprises in the book, such as how Rubin became a gun runner for Stephen Biko's South African resistance. But these were not the subplots that most interested me. Rather, I was fascinated by Rubin's struggle within, his own search for meaning in a world that seemed to be a thin film of false reality. We were speaking with a reporter this morning, and she said to Rubin, "Did the world seem strange to you after 20 years in prison?" And Rubin said, "The world seemed strange to me even before I got to prison." You see, even before Rubin was arrested for this crime, his life had been defined by his anger and his bitterness. And after he was put in prison, he spent years raging against his captors. But when the charges against Rubin were finally dropped and he was exonerated, he gave a speech in New York, an excerpt of which is on the back of the book. And in talking to this audience, people were expecting him to denounce his adversaries who had kept him in prison for all those years. And he asked himself the question, or he asked the audience the question. He said, "Am I bitter?" And Rubin said, "Bitterness only consumes the vessel that contains it. And for me to permit or control bitterness to control my life in any way whatsoever would be to allow those who put me in prison for 22 years to take even more than the time they've already taken. Now that would make me an accomplice to their crime." Well, when I read that, I realized that if I could find out what happened to Rubin in prison, I'd have one hell of a yarn. The miraculous journey of Rubin Carter refers to two separate but parallel journeys, one through the criminal justice system and one more personal, spiritual odyssey. You see, for Rubin, fighting for his innocence was easy. Fighting for his dignity against the strictures of prison was more difficult. But fighting for his heart's ease, for peace of mind, for some meaning to his life, that had been the hardest fight yet. I was with Rubin a while back when a boxing fan asked him, "Who was your toughest fight against?" And Rubin said, "Myself." And that's what this book is about. In closing, I'll just make one last comment. I did walk through every door in Rubin's life. I spent hundreds of hours with Rubin, both on the phone and in person. And I interviewed about 120 people who knew Rubin, both his friends and his adversaries. And I read through thousands of pages of court documents, prison, military, and police records, plus Rubin's personal journals and letters. I did not sugarcoat what I found. I've chronicled Rubin's achievements as well as his disappointments, his triumphs as well as his mistakes. But through this long process of research and inquiry, I developed a great deal of personal respect and admiration for Rubin as I repeatedly was shown his strength of character. When I sent Rubin the manuscript, I was skittish about what he would think of this rather gritty portrait of his life. And I realized that regardless of how many people buy the book, or what the critics write, or what my publisher thought, or even what my wife said, there was only one true judge of this book. If Rubin Carter didn't think I had captured his story, not only the facts, but also the spirit of his life, then this book would have been a failure. So I sent Rubin the manuscript. Now, the thing you need to know about Rubin is he's a night owl. And he would often call me in the wee hours of the morning just to chat. So at 1 a.m. on this night, the phone rings. So I roll out of bed, and I go to the phone, and I pick it up. "Hey, Jim, this is Rube. I just want you to know I'm about to begin your book." I said, "Okay, Rube, I hope you enjoy it. Good night." I go back to bed. A half hour later, the phone rings again. I roll out of bed, I pick up the phone, and it's Rubin, and he's in a state of high excitement. And he says, "Jim, I've finished the first chapter, and I think it's great. You're a very clever writer, and I know where you're going with this story." And he goes on in this vein for some time, and finally I say, "Rube, I'm glad you like it, but you don't have to call me after each chapter. Rubin read the manuscript 3 times, and he did not ask for a single change in the book. And when he told me, Jim, this book is a roadmap to enlightenment, I knew that no matter what this book does in the marketplace, I had realized my goal and satisfied the most important judge of all. It's my honor to introduce Rubin Hurricane Carter.
Thank you,
Please, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, maybe we ought to try that again. I love it. I love it. It is indeed, ladies and gentlemen, a great honor, privilege, and a great pleasure. Wow, we got people up there too. Wow. And a great pleasure for me to be here this evening at Friends Select School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Long way from Trenton State Prison, I can tell you that. Not too far, it's right across the river. But at least it's across the river. After struggling, given my history for the last 63 years of my life, constantly struggling with mindless, knuckle-headed human beings, just narrowly escaping the electric chair, being branded as a racist triple murderer. When you really come to think about it, it's a great pleasure for me to be anywhere today. And since I am somewhat weary, thanks to him, he got me out of here on a book trail when I should be out there helping people. And I'm out here getting publicity. Since I've been talking for weeks and weeks and weeks and can't talk much more, I would like to tell you 3 stories. And these stories will tell us where people are today, where they can be, and where they was. And once there was a little boy who was walking in the fields of his father and happened upon an eagle's egg that had fallen from the mountains high above surrounding the tiny village. The boy picked the eagle's egg up, took it home with him, and placed it in the nest amongst his prairie chickens. And lo and behold, the little eaglet hatched amongst the brood of prairie chickens. He learned how to scratch in the earth for seeds and insects to eat. He learned how to quack and cackle. He learned how to fly in brief spurts of a flapping of the wing and then come crashing back to the earth, because that's the way prairie chickens act, don't they? Before long, the prairie chicken, scratching in the dirt, grew old and tired and tough. And one day, as he was scratching in the dirt for something to eat, he looked up in the sky and saw a magnificent bird floating on the wind currents, majestically. And the now big eagle clucked to his prairie chicken neighbor, who was also scratching in the earth for seeds and insects to eat. He said, "My, what a beautiful creature. What is that? What kind of creature is that? It is so big, it is so huge, and it is magnificent." And the prairie chicken neighbor, scratching in the dirt, too busy trying to get something to eat, said, "Look, don't you pay that any mind. Don't pay it any attention." That's the eagle. That's the king of the birds. But you can never be like that. And so the now big and old eagle never thought again about it and died scratching in the dirt as a prairie chicken. That's what we as human beings on this earth do. Scratch in the dirt for seeds and insects to eat as though we were prairie chickens, when we are all actually eagles. And the reason why we remain prairie chickens is because 6 human beings trapped in happenstance, in the dark and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story's told. Their dying fire in need of logs, the first woman held hers back. For of all the faces around the fire, she noticed that one of them were black. The next man looking across the way saw not one member of his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The third man sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should my stick of wood be used to warm the idle rich? The rich man just sat back and thought of all the wealth he had in store and how he can keep what he had earned from the lazy and shiftless poor. The black man's face bespoke of revenge as their fire faded from sight. For all he could see in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the whites. The last man in this forlorn group did naught except for gain, given only to those who gave is how he played the game. The logs held tight in death's still hands was proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. And that's what we all do. That's exactly what we do. Then there was a big man, a heavy man, who fell asleep one night while shelling peas in the cramped quarters of his hovel. And the hut mysteriously caught on fire. And the village people rushed to the scene to try to save the sleeping man before his house could burn to the ground. But they couldn't do it because the house was too small and the man was too big to move. So as they were struggling trying to save the sleeping man before the house could burn to the ground, the village wise man happened upon the scene and saw this struggling mass trying to save this sleeping man. He just hollered, "Wake him up! Just wake him up and he'll save himself." You see, those 3 things are exactly what we do to ourselves. We talk about a new millennium. Well, as a convicted racist murderer, just narrowly escaping the electric chair and spending 20 years in prison, I come to realize that in order for us to survive, that we must wake up. All of us must wake up. That we are in a virtual garden of magic, a paradise. We are actually in a paradise where anything that you can possibly dream in your mind and conceive and work towards it can indeed be achieved. My being here tonight is living proof of that. Absolute living proof of that. That we are limited only by our own imagination. This is a world of unlimited possibilities. And there is nothing that we can't do on this earth. Nothing that we can't do. And the only reason why we don't do it is because we have too much heavy baggage on us to fly like the eagles that we are. That excess baggage is the fact that I'm a he-male and you're a she-male. That I'm black and you're white. or you're red, or you're yellow, you're brown, that I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican, I'm independent, I'm German, I'm African, you're Dutch, I'm French. You know, we all live under the power of Kundalini. Have you ever heard the power of Kundalini? The power of Kundalini comes from a rich magician who owned sheep and had problems because the sheep kept running away. They didn't like the fact that the man, Kundalini, wanted their meat and fur. They didn't like that, so they had sense. They ran away. So the magician had a problem that he had to solve, and he solved it. He hypnotized his sheep. He told one sheep, "You are not a sheep, and I do not want your meat, and I do not want your fur. You are a lion." The next sheep, he said, "You're a tiger." The next sheep, "You're an eagle." The next, "You're a bear." And the mad magician had no more problems. The sheep stopped running away. Well, that's what we are. We are under the power of hypnosis on this planet. The power of Kundalini. The power of trying to be everything else but what we really are. We want to be black and white and green and purple and Jewish and Italian and African. We want to be all those things, and we are none of those things. In fact, it is those very things that keep us from the essence of ourselves, that keep us from flying away off this planet high into the atmosphere. If everyone in this room's excess baggage was just laid down at your feet, just lay it down on your feet. Don't worry about anybody taking it, because everybody has their own. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. If we could just lay these things down in this so-called new millennium, if we could lay these things down, everybody in this room would immediately begin to levitate. Everybody would immediately begin to levitate. And we would live in a world where human beings love and understand other human beings. Just human beings. We all belong to the same human family. Every one of us. And the only reason why we don't understand that is because we are sleeping. We are sleeping people. We need to wake up to save ourselves. Because if we continue to follow the old math way of putting in time and abnegating responsibility, then ain't no change gonna come. You see, people love change and hate it at the same time. What we really want is for everything to get better, but still remain the same. That's what we want. And in order to do that, in this new millennium, we must lay down all of our excess baggage at the old millennium. And so we can enter into this new millennium clean. Just as the two monks who were walking down in the forest one day, on their way to a retreat, a young monk and an old monk. And these monks just happened to belong to a set of monks that practice celibacy, abstinence. And as they was walking through the woods, they happened upon this raging stream and a woman standing on the side of the bank, afraid to get in the water, afraid to be swept away. Well, the old monk just bent down, and the woman climbed upon his back. They waded across the water, got on the other side. The old monk bent down, the woman climbed on his back, off his back, and the two monks went on their way, and the woman went on her way. But the young monk was agitated. He couldn't understand what he had just saw. He couldn't understand it. And finally, he could hold his tongue no longer. He said, "Tell me, old man, tell me, how does it feel to break your vows of celibacy for so many years? How does it feel to carry a beautiful woman? How does it feel to have her warm arms wrapped around your neck, her breath on your ear, her soft breast pressing against your back, her thighs wrapped around your waist? Tell me, old man, how does it feel to carry a beautiful woman?" And the old man looked at the young monk and said, perhaps it is you who should tell me how it feels to carry a beautiful woman. You see, I put the woman down back there at the river, but obviously you are still carrying her. We must, if we intend to save ourselves, good people, and I'm serious about this, if we intend to save ourselves, we have to wake up and we have to put all of this foolishness aside, all of these things that has kept us apart for all of these many years, while we were still laboring under the false pretense that we are the home of the free and the home of the brave. That's bullshit. That is bullshit. We are not, and beg my pardon, I don't mean to insult anybody by using that word, but it's true. It's true. We do have the ability to be better than we are. Much, much better than we are. We have the ability to provide shelter, support, encouragement, and love to everybody. You see, hate put me in prison, but love bust me out. Love. I know this is kind of strange, this old punch drunk prize fighter up here is talking like this. But love cures all people, both those who give it and those who receive it. And it is love that we need to connect ourselves up to. And I'm serious. I don't want to preach because I'm not a preacher. My families are preachers. I am not. And my family is here tonight too. A whole lot of them are here tonight. Hi. So there's one last ditty that I want to say because it's really miraculous. In fact, my entire life has been miraculous. And that's why Jim has coined his book, Hurricane, The Miraculous Journey of Rubin Carter. And it has indeed been miraculous. Now, I use been, past tense, only to make a point, because this is not the culmination of my life. This is just the beginning. You know, we are going on from here. But I forgot what I was going to say, man. What you say? Oh, no, I'm not going to talk about that. No. Jim was telling me, when I said that my life is miraculous, Jim wanted me to say, and let me tell you why. Because for the last 20 years, I have been reviled as a triple racist murderer, locked down in Trenton State Prison for the rest of my life, just narrowly escaping the electric chair. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to the White House. And Black House, clap. White House, clap. And there I was, sitting next to the President of the United States, the most influential person on the face of this earth, engaging him in serious, critical conversation about things that's taking place in the world today. So close to him that I could hear every breath he took. And Monday, I'll be addressing the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, if that's not miraculous, I don't know what is. So, this last ditty, because it's important. It's important to me. I think this is one of the most important things that ever happened to me in my life. When I was sure, see, I wrote the books that made up this movie. I wrote the movie script that made up this movie and all that. So this didn't come to me on its own. Nothing comes to you by accident. Accidents happen all over the place. They never happen in a straight line. Never. And that's why we all live under the law of accident. But when I was certain that this movie was finally going to be made, I said to myself, okay, Denzel Washington, and that Denzel Washington is going to betray me. And I tell you, I never knew how good I looked until I saw Denzel Washington. When I was positive that Denzel was going to play me, I knew that Denzel would have to come to me and ask for my instructions on how to play me. I mean, how would Denzel Washington know how it feels to be dashed from the top of the world to the very bottom of the world, locked away in prison? How would Denzel Washington know how it feels to be snatched away from your beautiful wife and your 3-year-old child and be branded a triple racist murderer? How would Denzel Washington know how that felt? So I said, he's going to have to come to me. He's going to have to do it. And if he doesn't do it, he's a dork. You know? But lo and behold, it didn't happen the way I thought it would happen. We met, Denzel and I, and we began talking, and we talked about everything. And we flew from Toronto to California, from California to New York, from New York back to Toronto, talking all the time. And one day, after a rather intensive 5 or 6 hour conversation, circling the globe 2 or 3 times, we stopped for lunch and walked around the corner of the Four Seasons in Toronto to a very expensive restaurant, for which I'm glad that Denzel was paying the bill. After lunch, I excused myself and I went to the restroom. And when I came out, I found Denzel in the foyer, in the hallway of this restaurant, just looking at himself in the mirror, just staring at himself, you know? Well, I thought he wanted to be alone, so I went back to the table. And when Denzel came back to the table, we continued to talk. And the more we talked, the better I began to like him, even above what I already liked him. I mean, this was a real emotional surge. I said, I liked the way he moved. I liked his vocabulary. I liked his stridency. I loved his tenacity, and I loved his laughter. I loved it. I said, my God, I'm loving this man. I said, well, maybe I've been in prison a little longer than I should. And then it hit me like a double left hook and a straight right cross. When I came out of the restroom and found Denzel in the hallway staring in the mirror, he was clearing his canvas in preparation of portraying me. And when he came back to the table and sat down, from that very second, he was giving me back to me. And I was loving what I saw. I loved me. I was loving me. You know, that was the greatest. If this movie does nothing, as Jim said, if his book bombs in the store, what it brought and what it provided is good enough. Well, if this movie fails, that's good enough for me. Because what I saw was something that I had been loving all my life, but had never seen. Had never seen before. And when I saw it, I said, whoa, I love me. And from that moment on, I began to act like I love me. I began to send myself 4 bouquets of flowers every single week. One flower is called truth. The other flower is called truth and friendship. The other bouquet is called truth, friendship, surrounded by love. And the 4th bouquet was good. You see, truth leads to good. Most people think that good comes from truth. It is not so. Whenever the Creator is described in any language, in any text, the Creator is always described as, I am good. And therefore, everything must flow from good. So truth comes from good. And if you follow that truth, if you follow those principles, if you follow those laws, that truth can lead you to the level of good. But when you get to the level of good, you got to leave the truth alone and operate from the level of good. You must be good, not act like you're good. Be good. And if you be good, if all of us be good, we will live in a good place where everybody will be educated, everybody will be supported, everybody will have a job, no one will be discriminated against for any reason whatsoever, because we're all nothing but human beings. We're not gays, we're not blacks, we're not whites, we're not cops, we're not crooks, we are human beings. And the whole raison d'etre of being a human being is not to remain a human being, because being a human being, my friends, is a greatly overrated commodity. Greatly overrated commodity. Because it is human beings who hate one another. It's human beings who fight one another, who rape and rob one another, who do all these terrible, terrible things to one another. And therefore, our mission in life is not to remain human beings, but to be a human becoming something other than a human being. And that should be our quest for this new millennium, where we'll have no more racism, we'll have no more death penalty, we'll have no more Mumia Abu Jamals sitting on death row. We will have no more of that. But that one virtue, love, could be made universal, the strong would not prey upon the weak. The deceitful would not prey upon the simple. Men would commit no robberies. Chiefs of families would commit no usurpations. If that one virtue, love, could be made universal, we would be the greatest creatures on the face of this earth. We have the ability to do that and to be that. We really, really have the ability. If anyone can, from a prison cell, trapped for 20 years, overcome his obstacles, overcome all of the adversity, overcome whatever it is needed to overcome, if I can do it, you can do it. And if you don't do it, it's because you don't want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, then step aside and let those who do want to do it do. You see? We have two kinds of people in this world: the watchers and the doers. And the watchers sit around watching the doers do. So if you can't do it, get out of the way and let those of us who are willing to commit our lives to it, do it. Thank you.
I'm probably not the best one to judge this, but from where I was standing, I think Rubin looks a hell of a lot better than Denzel Washington. Now, Jim had suggested that Rubin might go a little bit longer than he originally said he would, because they've been traveling together for a while. So we'll have time for a few questions. So what I'd ask is that if you have a question, if you'd raise your hand and I'll call, and if you would stand and talk as loud as you could. Thank you. Right there.
I don't have a question, but I saw The Hurricane, and it's one of the best movies I've seen in a long, long time. And I'm so grateful it was made because I found out about you.
Thank you.
I would like to know, Rubin, a little bit about these three wonderful people from Canada, because we saw the movie also, and it blew us away. It is an Oscar contender. There's no doubt about it. It's wonderful.
Thank you. The question was, who are these three people from Canada? Well, actually, the three people was a composite of 13 people. And we had to make a composite of them in order to protect them while they were doing their investigating of my case. And that's why we just simply called them the Canadians. But the real story of the hurricane is, in the salvation of the hurricane, is three people, two teenagers, young black teenagers, John Artis, who was captured with me, and who had never been in trouble with the law before, and who had just graduated from high school and was on his way to college on a scholarship for football and track. He was a highly acclaimed athlete. And from the moment that we were stopped on June 17th, 1966, John Artis's mettle was tested. Because John Artis could have walked away from there at any second. All he had to do was to say that loud-mouthed prize fighter, that bald-headed guy that hates everybody and hates himself as well, committed this crime, and I would be dead. And John Artis would have been free. But they probably would have double-crossed him anyway and killed him too. But it's only because of John Artis and the creator, of course, that I'm here. So John Artis, throughout the 15 years that he spent in prison, contracting an incurable blood disorder, and today he has fingers and toes amputated. If John Artis would have said at any moment that Rubin Carter had anything to do with this, Rubin Carter would be dead right now. In fact, the governor of New Jersey, Governor Brendan Byrd, brought John Artis out of his house 5 days before Christmas and sat him down in front of his mother and father and his brothers and sisters and promised, guaranteed, that if John gave an incriminating statement against me, he would be home for Christmas. And John Artis responded, "My mother and father didn't teach me to lie. They taught me to tell the truth." So John Artis is my hero. He saved my life. John saved my life until a 15-year-old ghetto urchin, Leslie Martin, trapped in the ghettos of Bedford-Stuyvesant, New York, came across this group of Canadians that we were talking about, who was down from Canada working on a device to perfect a gas-saving device. And they met Leslie at the EPA lab in Brooklyn, where Leslie was working as a summer job. And they grew close to this youngster. And they listened to his aspirations and his dreams. And Leslie was third in his grade 10 Brooklyn class of 40. Third. He was considered to be an honor student. And yet the Canadians were dumbfounded when they found out that the boy couldn't read or write or speak a single word of standard English. He didn't even know the name of the country he lived in. So these Canadians were mind-boggled. They said, how could this be? How could this youngster achieve or attain his dreams if he doesn't know how to read or doesn't know how to write? So they went to his mother and father. His father, by the way, happened to be the lead singer of the Del Viking doo-wop group, you know, "Come, Come, Go With Me." You remember that song? Well, his father, Earl, is, look, my claim to fame is being innocent, not a singer. So the father and the parents are glad that one of their siblings is going to escape this ghetto, gave the Canadians permission to bring Leslie back to Canada and to educate him properly. Not to miseducate him, but educate him properly. And as they were teaching Leslie about his rich African heritage, They gave him Richard Wright to read, Du Bois to read, Franklin to read, Frederick Douglass to read, all of these kinds of books to read. And Leslie happened upon my autobiography, in which I wrote while I was in prison, and sent it out over the 40-foot prison walls into the ocean of life, hoping upon hope that someone someday would see this bobbing bottle in the ocean of life, pick it up, read my message, and come to help me. And Leslie Martin did exactly that. He came, and he brought his Canadian family with him. Little did I know that by answering Leslie's little teeny letter, that this young child would be the catalyst upon which my freedom would come. That is a miracle. That is miraculous.
Call the next question.
Wait back there. Yeah.
Mr. Carter.
Yes, sir. No, Mr. Carter is my father. I am called Rubin. Behold, a son.
Rubin, you look great, first of all.
I feel great.
Because of your experience, can you still keep an open mind when you hear things, for example, the O.J. Simpson trial, the Ray Caruth trial, or does your mind automatically say, frame up?
No. I don't have an automatic mind. You have an automatic mind. I do not have an automatic mind. My mind is awake. My mind is very conscious. I am aware of who I am, what I am, and who you are, and where we are, and what we can do where we are to be what we're supposed to be. You see, we are planted here on organic life on earth, flowers, all of us. Each one of us is a world within ourselves. Everything that exists in this universe exists right here in each one of us. We don't have to go to the moon or to the sun or to Venus in order to find the materiality there. We can just look in ourselves. The materiality is there. That is our spaceship through life, that materiality. But we don't know that. You see, we think that we've been put here simply as a punishment, maybe, or for some other reason. But we are here for a great experiment. And Jim was telling me to cut, so I will.
I think the answer to your question is no. He does not decide someone's innocence or guilt by the headlines in the paper, because that's what happened to him, and he knows not to make that mistake again.
On a lighter note, what was it like to fight Joey Giardello from South Philadelphia?
All right, now, last question. Make it quick.
Well, no, don't we have some time? When we get to talking, we got to talk here. We're going to sit down and have a fireside talk, face to face here. Let me tell you about Joey Giardello. I fought Joey. Joey and I fought right here in Philadelphia at the Convention Center in 1964, December 1964, for the middleweight championship. And Joey is a tremendous prize fighter, as well as a tremendous human being. In fact, this is a fighting town, Philly. Oh man, this is where I started my stuff, right here in Philly. But I got ran out of town by Sonny Liston. I did. That's the truth. We used to all train at the same gym. At that time, Len Matthews was the lightweight champ. Charlie Scott was the welterweight champ. Gil Turner was the #1 middleweight contender. Harold Johnson was the light heavyweight champ. And Sonny Liston was the heavyweight champ. And we used to all train, and I was just starting. I had one fight. And you know, there's a hierarchy in professional fighting. Preliminary fighters do not hang out with the contenders and the champions. You just don't do that. You just don't do that. But one day in the gym, Sonny was getting ready for a television fight in Madison Square Garden. And his sparring partners didn't show up that day. None of them. See, they were smart. They were very smart. So Sonny had no sparring partners until a little bald-headed would-be prize fighter looked up into the ring at Sonny and said, opened his big mouth and said, "I'll spar with you, Sonny." And Sonny looked down at me with that baleful stare. "I don't care." And away we went. I mean, we did some humping. We threw some leather. That gym was smoking, you know, because Sonny was big and he was quick and he could punch hard. And I was sort of known as one of the hardest punchers in the middleweight division. And as a matter of fact, one of the hardest punchers in the whole prize fighting game. So Sonny had to hit me to keep me off of him. And every day we began sparring one after another. And after one intensive sparring session, sweating like a dog, I went back to the corner and took my headgear off, and my headgear was full of blood. I was bleeding from my ears. And I said, Rubin, now there's hard-headed and there's hard-headed. This guy is going to kill you. So I packed up that night and left Philadelphia on the first thing smoking. I knew that if I stayed there, I would have to spar with Sonny again, because he was my friend, and he needed to work, and so did I. But I just couldn't do it. I had to run. So this town here is one of the greatest fighters in the whole world. Everybody is scared of Philadelphia fighters. Philadelphia fighters are the wrecking crew of the boxing world, the demolition squad of the boxing world. And I don't understand why we have so much problems here with all you good fighters. We were talking about Joey Giardello. Joey is just one of those kinds of fighters. Joey could fight, and he had a lot of chutzpah. When I fought Joey and lost Joey, I lost the fight. Joey didn't win the fight, I lost the fight. Because I didn't fight my fight, I fought Joey's fight. I was trying to box Joey, and Joey could clearly outbox me. And he did. And therefore, I did not win the title. I didn't fight my fight. I said, I got to go 15 rounds. Why do I have to go 15 rounds if I can end it in one? It doesn't make any sense to me. But when you put a certain mindset in your head, when you condition yourself for a certain way, it becomes a habit. And there's only one thing in the world that'll work for us for nothing. Not even a fool works for nothing. One thing, and that's a habit. You just let that habit get established, and it'll operate even though you're walking around in a trance. And that's what's wrong with us. Habitually doing wrong to other people. Habitually misunderstanding other people. And it is the misunderstanding that is causing all the confusion.
For a year and a half.
We'll take one more question, because unfortunately they're going to start wrestling over the microphone here. And then we'll break up so that they can sign all the books. So.
How you doing? Rubin, my name is Maurice, and I've been through the flight that you've been through. I represent like a handful of brothers that have been incarcerated, that have come home, gotten my life together. I work at PNC Bank around the corner, and I work for a youth mentoring program called the School of Hard Knocks. You were speaking on about, the hate within, and I can relate to that because I was locked up, I was incarcerated for 4 years. And for 2 of them years, I was the laziest, my mind state was not what it should be. I came home in the summer of '97. I've been out a little over 2 years. Good. And every Sunday, we go down to the Youth Study Center here on 20th and Pennsylvania and try to give back. A handful of so many people here that come out to support you. We try to support those who are in the same situation that we've been in, have homicides, have rape cases, have drug cases, things that a lot of people take for granted, but we come to find out that a lot of them are just misunderstood. You were just speaking, and I can relate to that because I'm 27 years old, just celebrated my 27th birthday last December. And, what you're saying is really touching me because I've been there. And I know what it's like to, have all this rage up inside me. But now, I try to give back to those who are less fortunate than myself. Like you said, we get blessings from God every time we do something positive. All the good that we do, shows back on our community. And I just realized...
blessings from the Creator, whether we do good or bad, because the Creator maintains the life force within us. And as long as we have that life force within us, my brother, 99% of the problem is solved. And that little 1%, dealing with other human beings, that's light shit. Light stuff, man. Light stuff. We can do it. We can do it. But did you know, and do all of you know, that in this country, 1 out of every 3 young black men in this country between the ages of 12 and 27 are under the control of the criminal justice system? 1 out of 3. 1 out of 3. That's outrageous. There are more young black men, more young black men in prison in this country than there are in this universities. That's sad. The prisons have become assembly lines of death in this country. There are death camps set up all around this country, and it is killing people every single day. Every single day. And we don't know anything about it. We turn our eyes from it. We must not turn our eyes from it. We have to be aware of what's going on in our lives and going on in our country, because it affects all of us. If one of us is poor, we're all poor. If one of us is hungry, we're all hungry. If one of us is in prison illegally, then we're all in prison illegally. We all must be brothers and sisters to one another. We just have to do that. It's not worth it being angry. When you're angry and bitter and mean, it only hurts you. It doesn't hurt the person in which you're projecting that anger at. It doesn't hurt the person who you're projecting bitterness to. It's like a toothache. Your toothache doesn't hurt your wife, your daughter, your children, your son. It doesn't even hurt the dentist. In fact, the dentist is going to hurt you and be paid for it. That's what anger is. That's what bitterness is. And it's just not worth it. Listen, I was the angriest rascal on this planet. Angry, man. Mean. I was mean. I was mean, and I would fight. I would fight because I would protect myself, and I feel that everybody has the right to protect themselves and should protect themselves. And if you can take an old war horse like me and turn him in and turn a hurricane into a gentle breeze, then that's where we want to go. Let's stick with love. I guess we got to get out of here and sign these books, right? Let's go, brother.
There's if you'll give them a minute, they'll get across the hallway, and there'll be 2 lines, one for books that are signed and one for books to be purchased. Thanks. Welcome to Friends Select School. My name is Bob Carter. I'm the Director of Institutional Advancement at the school, and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of Rose Hagan, the head of the school, and the entire community. 2 years ago, we began a relationship with Joseph Fox Bookstore, which has resulted in a series of events such as tonight's. Michael Fox is an alumnus of Friends Select, and we are delighted to help support he and his mother, Madeline, as they run the premier independent bookstore in the area. If you're not on our mailing list for such events, please feel free to sign up out in the lobby, and we'll make sure that we let you know about future events when they happen. Tonight you're going to hear from James Hirsch, followed by Rubin Carter, and then they will answer questions for a brief period. As many as possible, but they want to leave enough time to be able to sign all of the books that people want to sign. At the end of the question and answer period, both James and Rubin will be in the room across the hall from the theater, and we'll set up a line so that you can purchase books from Joseph Fox Books and then have them signed. Due to time constraints, they will only be able to sign books and not any other kinds of memorabilia, and we appreciate your cooperation with that. If you do not wish to have a book signed, at the end of the talk, you can leave through the door, which is at the back right of the auditorium, and that will take you out to 17th Street.
Years to take even more than the time they've already taken. Now that would make me an accomplice to their crime. Well, when I read that, I realized that if I could find out what happened to Rubin in prison, I'd have one hell of a yarn. The miraculous journey of Rubin Carter refers to two separate but parallel journeys, one through the criminal justice system and one more personal, spiritual odyssey. And you see, for Rubin, fighting for his innocence was easy. Fighting for his dignity against the strictures of prison was more difficult. But fighting for his heart's ease, for peace of mind, for some meaning to his life, that had been the hardest fight yet. I was with Rubin a while back when a boxing fan asked him, "Who was your toughest fight against?" And Rubin said, "Myself." And that's what this book is about. In closing, I'll just make one last comment. I did walk through every door in Rubin's life. I spent hundreds of hours with Rubin, both on the phone and in person. And I interviewed about 120 people who knew Rubin, both his friends and his adversaries. And I read through thousands of pages of court documents, prison, military, and police records, plus Rubin's personal journals and letters. I did not sugarcoat what I found. I've chronicled Rubin's achievements as well as his disappointments, his triumphs as well as his mistakes. But through this long process of research and inquiry, I developed a great deal of personal respect and admiration for Rubin as I repeatedly was shown his strength of character. That hard stare, and he shakes his head and says, "Jim, what is this? My prison cell was bigger than this room." I was summarily fired as his travel agent, but I did get to write the book. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes about the book and then give way to Rubin. So why a book about Rubin Carter? Before I began this project, I was like many people in this country, in that I was familiar with the outlines of Rubin's life. He'd been a top-rated boxer in the 1960s when he was arrested for triple homicide in New Jersey. Despite his claims of innocence, he was convicted of that crime. Over the years, he became a cause celeb as Bob Dylan, Muhammad Ali, and many others rallied to his support. Nonetheless, Rubin spent almost 20 years in prison before his conviction was overturned, and he was eventually fully exonerated. That's what I knew of Rubin's story when my agent called me in June of 1998 and told me that Rubin might be willing to work with an author in a story about his life. So I went out and I began reading everything that had been written about Rubin and started talking to some of his friends and lawyers. Then I called Rubin myself. Now, he didn't know me from Adam. So I just introduced myself and I said, "Rubin, I don't think your story has been told yet, and I'd like to tell it." Well, Rubin did not exactly jump at this offer. He doesn't trust people very readily. But we began talking, and finally I said, "If I do this project, I have just one demand. I need to be able to walk through every door in your life and write what I find." And Rubin said, "I have nothing to hide." So we got the ball rolling. What drew me to this story? Rubin's life has taken him through a series of inherently dramatic venues: the army, the boxing ring, the courtroom, the prison. And the action from these venues propels the narrative along. There are also a lot of surprises in the book, such as how Rubin became a gun runner for Stephen Biko's South African resistance. But these were not the subplots that most interested me. Rather, I was fascinated by Rubin's struggle within, his own search for meaning in a world that seemed to be a thin film of false reality. We were speaking with a reporter this morning, and she said to Rubin, "Did the world seem strange to you after 20 years in prison?" And Rubin said, "The world seemed strange to me even before I got to prison." You see, even before Rubin was arrested for this crime, his life had been defined by his anger and his bitterness. And after he was put in prison, he spent years raging against his captors. But when the charges against Rubin were finally dropped and he was exonerated, he gave a speech in New York, an excerpt of which is on the back of the book. And in talking to this audience, people were expecting him to denounce his adversaries who had kept him in prison for all those years. And he asked himself the question, or he asked the audience the question. He said, "Am I bitter?" And Rubin said, "Bitterness only consumes the vessel that contains it. And for me to permit or control bitterness to control my life in any way whatsoever would be to allow those who put me in prison for 22 years."
When Michael Fox called me to tell me the possibility of this event, I said yes immediately. We knew nothing about a movie at the time, let alone that Denzel would be in it. Growing up in the 60s and 70s, and I wish I could say as a very young person in the 60s and 70s, but I can't, I was both moved and angered by Rubin Carter's story. I felt then, and I still do, that it was a story about America that people needed to hear. And I couldn't understand why more people didn't know about it. Fortunately for us, James Hirsch has told that very complicated story in a powerful book that I strongly urge you to read. James S. Hirsch is a former reporter for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and Hurricane is his first book. Please welcome James Hirsch.
Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's good to be here. About a year and a half ago, Rubin and I traveled to New York to talk to publishers about our story proposal. And at the time, Rubin and I had spent many hours on the telephone. He lives in Toronto and I live in Boston, but we hadn't yet met face to face. So I booked us in a rather modest hotel in 2 small rooms, and I went to meet him for the first time. And Rubin opened up the door and he gives me this great big bear hug. But then he steps back and he gestures around his rather undersized room. He gives me